The hallway was dark, but Elena could still see the blood on the man's collar. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't supposed to see any of it. 5 minutes earlier, she had simply been cleaning a room she'd cleaned 40 times before, the same brass door handles, the same black marble floor, the same silence she had learned not to question. But tonight, the study door was open. Just a crack. And through that crack, she heard a voice say a name she recognized. Her own. Elena froze with the cloth still in her hand, her heart suddenly louder than the voices behind that door. Because in the next sentence, someone asked a question she would never forget for the rest of her life. So what do we do about the maid who's still in the house? She didn't move. She didn't breathe. And somewhere behind that door, a man everyone in the city feared was about to decide whether she would live to see tomorrow. This is the story of the night Elena Voss learned the truth about the man she worked for, and why, from that moment on, she could never simply walk away. 3 months earlier, Elena Voss was just another name on a staffing agency's list, 27 years old, quiet, careful with money, and exhausted in the specific way that only comes from working 2 jobs to pay for someone else's life. Her mother, Rosa, had been sick for over a year. Not sick enough to be an emergency. Sick enough that every specialist appointment meant another month Elena couldn't afford to be careless with a paycheck. So when the agency called and said a private household on the hill needed a live-in housekeeper, generous pay, strict rules, minimal questions, Elena didn't ask why the pay was double the market rate. She didn't ask why the contract required her to sign an agreement about discretion. She needed the money, and the house looked like something out of a magazine: iron gates, quiet gardens, a staff that spoke softly and never lingered in hallways longer than necessary. The man who owned it was named Damien Cross. She met him exactly twice in her first month. Both times, he said perhaps 6 words to her total. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't warm either. He moved through his own house like a man who had trained himself to never be surprised by anything, and the staff around him moved the same way, eyes down, voices low, footsteps careful. Elena told herself it was just old money. Rich people were strange. Rich people liked their privacy. She told herself that for 3 months. She was wrong, and some small, quiet part of her had known it the entire time. She just hadn't let herself listen to it. Not until the night the study door was left open. It was past 11 when Elena went to collect the tray from the east study, the way she did every night. The hallway lights had already been dimmed for the evening. She expected the room to be empty. It wasn't. 4 men stood inside, Damien at the head of the table, and 3 others she recognized only vaguely from cars that occasionally idled too long in the driveway. The door was cracked. Elena should have knocked. Instead, something in the tone of the room made her stop. The shipment was intercepted because someone talked, one of the men was saying. Someone in this house. There's no one in this house who doesn't already know the cost of talking, Damien answered. His voice was flat. Certain. There's the maid. Silence. Elena's stomach dropped so fast it felt physical. She's been here 3 months, the man continued. New. Unvetted beyond a background check. She was in the East Wing the night the Marchetti numbers went missing from your desk. She cleans my desk, Damien said. That doesn't make her a leak. It makes her a risk. And you know what we do with risks. Elena did not remember deciding to step back from the door. She only remembered, seconds later, standing at the far end of the hallway, the tray still in her hands, her whole body shaking so quietly that no one would have noticed unless they were looking directly at her. She had just learned 2 things in one breath. The house she worked in wasn't just wealthy. And the man she worked for had just been asked, out loud, whether she should disappear. She thought about running that same night. She got as far as packing 1 bag before she stopped herself and thought it through properly, the way fear makes you think when it finally slows down enough to let you. If she ran, and they were watching the house the way houses like this were always watched, running would be the thing that got her killed, not staying. If she stayed and said nothing, there was a chance, a small, fragile chance, that Damien's answer in that room had been enough to protect her. She cleans my desk. That doesn't make her a leak. It wasn't much. But it was something to hold onto in a house that suddenly felt like it had eyes in every wall. For the next 4 days, Elena did her job exactly as she always had, silent, careful, invisible, while quietly learning to read the house the way she used to read her mother's moods before a bad night. She noticed which staff avoided eye contact with her now. She noticed the man named Marcus, Damien's second, watching her a beat too long whenever she entered a room. Marcus was the one who had asked the question in the study. And Marcus, she was starting to understand, had not been satisfied with the answer he'd been given. On the 5th night, Elena found her room searched. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. But her drawers weren't quite the way she'd left them, and the small photo of her mother that always sat on the nightstand had been moved 2 inches to the left, the kind of detail only someone deliberately careless would leave behind. A message, not a mistake. Someone had gone through everything she owned. And they wanted her to know it. She almost quit that night. She had her hand on the phone to call the agency and end the contract, consequences or not, when there was a knock at her door. It was Damien. He had never once come to the staff quarters before. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking, and when he did, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "Marcus searched your room." Elena said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. "I'm telling you that not because I owe you an explanation," he continued, "but because I need you to understand something. If you run, he will assume the worst, and he will not ask permission next time. If you stay, and you say nothing, I can still protect you. But only if you never repeat what you heard. Not to the police. Not to your mother. Not to anyone." It was the longest sentence he had ever said to her. "Why would you protect me at all?" Elena finally asked. Damien didn't answer that night. He simply looked at her for a moment too long, said nothing else, and left. The question sat in Elena's chest for the next 6 days like a splinter she couldn't reach. The truth came out by accident, the way most truths in that house seemed to. Elena was in the study again, the same room, the same tray, when she noticed a file left open on the desk. She wasn't looking for it. She told herself that afterward, over and over, because what she saw inside it changed everything she thought she understood about the last 4 months. It was a personnel file. Her own. Not the version she remembered submitting to the staffing agency, a longer one. Background checks that went back years. Her mother's hospital records. Details about the debt Elena had quietly taken on to pay for treatment 18 months earlier. Debt she had borrowed from a small private lender to avoid going through official channels. A lender, she now realized, connected to the very organization she'd overheard in that study. Elena hadn't been hired at random. She had been hired because Damien Cross already knew exactly who she was before she ever walked through his gates, knew about her mother, knew about the debt, knew that she needed this job more than almost anyone else on that agency's list, and had chosen her anyway. Not as a risk to be managed. As someone he had already decided, long before that night in the study, that he was going to protect, because the debt she didn't know she owed had quietly been settled the same week she was hired, under a name that wasn't hers. Why would a man like that erase a stranger's debt and never say a word about it? That was the question Elena carried into the darkest part of this story. She didn't get the chance to ask him. 2 nights later, a car she didn't recognize followed her taxi 3 streets past the market where she bought her mother's medicine. She noticed too late. By the time she reached the apartment, Marcus was already standing outside the door, not threatening, not yet, but present in a way that made the message unmistakable. "He's making a mistake keeping you close," Marcus said quietly. "And when he realizes it, I want you to remember that I warned you first." That same night, Elena's mother took a turn for the worse, a fever that wouldn't break, a hospital admission that cost more than Elena had, and no one to call who wasn't somehow tangled in the one world she was desperate to stay out of. She sat in a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning, completely alone, and for the first time since the night behind that study door, she let herself cry, not from fear of the Mafia, not from fear of Marcus, but from the exhausting, private weight of carrying a secret that could get her killed while also trying to keep the one person she loved alive. It was the lowest point in the entire story. Not the threat. the loneliness underneath it. Her phone buzzed once. A single message, from a number she didn't recognize. Which hospital? She almost didn't answer. Damien arrived within the hour, and for the first time, Elena watched him become someone other than the composed, unreadable man she'd known for 4 months. He spoke to the hospital administrator directly. He covered every cost without being asked. And when Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, clearly having followed the same trail Elena had, the two men had a conversation in the hallway that Elena was, for once, allowed to hear. "She's a liability," Marcus said. "She always has been. You know the rules." "I know the rules," Damien answered. "I also know that 4 months ago, I made a choice, and I don't make choices I'm not willing to protect. This isn't about her. This is about what happens if this organization thinks you're soft." "Then let them think it," Damien said, and for the first time, his voice carried something Elena had never heard in it before, not threat, but certainty. "Because I'd rather be soft once, for the right reason, than hard for the wrong one for the rest of my life." Marcus left without another word. He never came near Elena again. Rosa recovered. Slowly, but fully, the kind of recovery that only happens when someone finally has access to the care they needed all along. Elena stayed in the house on the hill, but everything about her presence there had quietly changed. She was no longer invisible staff moving carefully through someone else's rules. She was someone Damien Cross had chosen to protect, in a world where protection was the rarest currency that existed. She finally asked him, weeks later, the question she'd been carrying since the study. Why me? Out of everyone on that list, why choose someone with a mother in the hospital and a debt she didn't even know about? Damien was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because everyone else on that list had nothing to lose, which meant nothing to protect. You had everything to lose. That's how I knew you'd never betray this house, not out of loyalty to me, but because you understood exactly what it costs to lose the person you love. I've spent my whole life around people who calculate loyalty. I wanted, once, to be around someone who simply understood it. Elena didn't have an answer for that. She didn't need one. For the first time in 4 months, the silence between them didn't feel like danger. It felt like something closer to trust. Elena still cleans that same brass door handle every morning. The same black marble floor. The same quiet hallway where, once, she stood frozen with a tray in her hands and her whole future hanging on 6 words from a stranger she didn't yet understand. But the silence in that house means something different to her now. It isn't the silence of fear anymore. It's the silence of 2 people who each learned, in the worst possible way, that the people worth trusting are rarely the ones who make the loudest promises, they're the ones who quietly decide, without ever needing to say it out loud, that you are worth protecting. She never planned to stay in that house forever. But some nights, standing in that same hallway, Elena realizes she isn't counting the days until she can leave anymore. She's simply staying, because for the first time in her life, someone chose to stay for her first.